Global tax justice has a number, at least according to political leaders, that number being 15%. That's what the OECD countries agreed on a week ago. And now G20 finance ministers in Venice want to push ahead with the global tax reform. The goal is more tax justice. And in addition to the minimum tax rate of 15%, it also includes ensuring that international corporations no longer just pay taxes at their headquarters, but also where they generate their sales. The global tax reform is mainly about tech companies, which often make money all around, but are able to pay taxes only where the rates are low. What would countries collect in additional taxes if only the 5 largest tech companies, Google's parent company Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft, were taxed evenly? Well, the development agent organization ActionAid has done the calculations. Here they are. G20 countries would have collected almost $32 billion more last year. The OECD countries just under $28 billion, and in the EU an additional $8 billion would have been ended with the tax collectors. Let's talk more about this with Pascal Saint-Amans. He's the Director of Tax Policy at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Welcome to the program, Pascal. On the face of it,
Thank you.
The G20 have already backed the framework for a global tax reform. What do you expect the outcome to be of this G20 finance ministers meeting today?
All the G20 countries have joined the agreement together with 131 countries, 90% of the world economy. So I think there is something like a celebration. It's been years that we're trying to introduce tax regulation of globalization, and now we're getting there with something very significant. So celebration and also political impetus to make sure that we have quick implementation for the agreement to become a reality as quickly as possible.
We have to keep in mind, though, that many industrialized countries like the United States, like Germany, they have a corporate tax rate above 15%. What's the use of agreeing on a common lower rate if those that are still below that won't join, like Ireland, like Estonia, like Hungary?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, tax is always a bit tricky. So let me explain. Countries usually tax their companies on a rate which is for the large countries between 20 and 30%, right? But the profits made by their companies abroad are not taxed. They are not taxed for the German companies in Germany because normally they should be taxed in the other countries where the German businesses do their business. Except that with globalization and no regulation for the past 30 years, these foreign profits have gone untaxed. And today they are taxed at a rate which is 2, 3, maybe 5, 6%. And what we're doing here is put a safety net and say for the profit made abroad, they should be taxed at least 15%, which is a pretty high rate compared to what we have today, which is close to 0. So that's the difference.
This deal is set to come into effect in 2023. Will it? And what will happen with the countries that I mentioned, like Ireland, like Hungary, like Estonia, up until then? Are you going to be able to make them join this deal?
That's a very good question. So the goal is to move fast, and to move fast because the US Congress is supposed to pass a tax reform by year end, and we hope that the world will be able to implement all that by 2023. It's a very aggressive time schedule, but it shows the political support. Now, do we need all the countries to join the agreement for it to be properly implemented? Not really, because the way it's been designed is to make sure that the companies of Germany or the US or the large countries, when they operate in the market, will be taxed at the minimum. And you don't need the intermediary countries, the investment hubs, the tax havens to be part of the agreement, which will be implemented. That said, there is one exception for Europe, because Europe needs unanimity, all the 27 countries to act together. And that's where you need Ireland and you need Hungary and Estonia, are the 3 EU countries which have joined. But they have not joined yet, but they've indicated they're part of the process and they are engaged in the negotiation. So hopefully they will join once the US has passed its reform.
Pascal, you mentioned the United States there. Before this global tax rate is set to come into effect, the EU wants to announce its own digital tax later this month, which doesn't go down well in Washington. Does this have the potential to derail the whole process?
It could, but we are confident that the Commission will either postpone its proposal for the deal to be finalized in October. You know, we have a frame agreement, which is quite firm, but we need to finalize it by October. So hopefully the Commission could postpone till October or come up with a proposal which will not be rejected by the members, because if the proposal is not compatible with the agreement, it will be dead on arrival. So I think there is a risk, but it's a small risk, and we are confident that the Commission will do the right thing.
Pascal Saint-Amans, OECD Tax Policy Director, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, let's talk more about this with our correspondent Bernd Riegert, who is following the talks for us in Venice. Good to see you, Bernd, there. On the face of it, the G20, so the 19 richest countries of the world and the EU, they have already backed the framework for a global tax reform. So what's there to talk about now?
Well, there's still to talk about a lot, because the principle is clear. The countries are on a way, what they call, to a tax revolution, to a fairer system. But the details have to be hammered out, because there's a long list of exemptions already. For example, the banking sector is not included, the oil industry is not included, also the international shipping industry is not included. And the first pillar of this tax reform, tax avoidance, taxing companies there where they make business. This is limited to only 100 big corporations. Not only the American internet giants, but also German car makers are in there, and also Chinese companies are in there. But of course, there are many more companies that will be eligible in the coming years, because this tax base will be broadened. And on the other hand, the minimum tax is also agreed in principle, but there are countries that say this is too high for us, for example, Ireland and Hungary in the European Union. And it's also not clear how this minimum tax will be calculated. Is it really the effective tax? Will there be exemptions? Can countries still pay subsidies to companies to lure them into their countries? So there are many things to talk about. But as I said, the first step is done. Now it's into the details.
Bernd, you mentioned it there. EU member states, Ireland, Hungary and Estonia have not signed off on this tax agreement. However, for it to come into effect, it needs to be unanimous, the backing in the EU. So how are these countries going to be made to toe the line?
Well, in fact, they can also start without Ireland and Hungary. The EU has not to agree anonymously, because taxation is a whole responsibility for every country. And the G20 can start also without these countries. The calculation here is that these small countries will have to follow sooner or later, because they cannot stem themselves against 80% of the world population, which is represented in G20. And these tax havens have to come up with a different business model now. They will not go out of business, but they have to think about other means to encourage countries to come to their shores and build up their business there. So it will, in the end, not depend on these small countries. But the more bigger question is, will the US be able to push this through? Because President Biden is facing fierce opposition against this tax revolution in Congress.
Bernd Riegert reporting from Venice there, the meeting of the G20 finance ministers. Bernd, thank you.